So now that we've created and combined elements representing the geometry of our 3D scene, it's time to explore the best reason you would ever use Photoshop for 3D work. It's time to texture our models. You won't believe the results we'll achieve by the end of this chapter. Go ahead and close down, save of course, all of the project files that you've been working with so far. Just go ahead and empty out Photoshop because we're going to start working now with some textures, a few new files, and I'd like us to continue from this point on with a consistent unified version of the Chalice project. You can of course go back and play with your own as well if you've been experimenting and doing something different, but just to make sure that everything in the subsequent lessons behaves the same, I'd like us to continue with the same project files. But first we're going to start by prepping a texture. Now we saw earlier how to make a seamless texture automatically using the clouds filter inside Photoshop set to the proper resolution. But there's a lot of times when you're working in Photoshop, and particularly in the land of 3D, where you need to create a seamless texture from a natural source that is not in fact seamless. So let's talk about how to do that. Let's open up the Tarnished Metal JPEG, which you'll find inside your Chapter 3 Textures and Lighting folder, inside your Firesprite folder, inside your Project Files folder, which is probably on your desktop or wherever you chose to install it. Let's just open this up in Photoshop. I'll go to full screen mode with the F key, and we'll temporarily collapse down our 3D panel. We won't be needing it right now. And what we have here is a square texture, which is just a shot of some old tarnished brass. And we're going to use this as the gold texture for our goblet. Now, gold doesn't tarnish and typically holds up pretty well. But the goblet that we are creating, we want to look very, very, very old. And so things do get beat up as they get older. And working with a grungy texture like this can be a really good start. But this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a seamless texture. If we come up to our filter menu, go down to Other and choose Offset, you'll see that if we set this value to, well, anything other than a multiple of 400 pixels, you can see pretty clearly that we have a seam both horizontally and vertically. Now, we don't care about vertical, but we do care about horizontal. We're going to be wrapping this texture around the top and then around the bottom of our chalice. And in order to keep the texture from getting distorted, we're going to need something that's approximately twice as wide as it is tall. And our image here is 400 pixels square. So these are nice, easy numbers to work with from a math standpoint. And if you just follow the steps along with me, we can quickly create a nice, wide, seamless texture. So we'll cancel out of this box, double-click on our background layer, and just accept the default. We don't really care what the name of the layer is. We just want to make sure that it's a floating layer. And I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to duplicate it 3 times. So I have a total of 4 layers. Now I'm going to come up to my image menu, choose canvas size, go to pixels instead of inches, and give ourselves a width of 1,000. And I'm going to anchor everything to the left-hand side because that's just easier. Click OK. Let's zoom out. And you'll see that we've created a canvas that's a little more than twice as wide as it is tall. The topmost layer, we're going to use our Move tool and drag to the right until it snaps into place. That's fine. And then the intermediate 2 layers, we're going to drag over, but we don't have to be completely precise about these. We just want to give them enough overlap to approximate about 200 pixels. It doesn't matter if they're completely precise. Now we've got a very obvious repeating pattern here. This isn't seamless at all. But if we go into Transform for each of these layers, I've got the second layer selected, that's this one right here, and hit Command-T or Control-T on Windows. I can right-click and choose Rotate 90 degrees clockwise, hit Return, come to the next layer, Transform, right-click, 90 degrees counterclockwise, hit Return, top layer, Transform, right-click, 180 degrees, hit Return. And we're starting to get something that's a little bit more mixed up. This is kind of cool. I'm actually going to swap the order of these two. I like the way we've got kind of a horizontal grain and a vertical grain, but then we have another vertical grain and then another horizontal grain. And I'd rather mix those up a little bit. So let's move this over to the left, select this layer, move it over to the right, and drag it up. Again, this is messy, but the names just don't matter. We're not going to stay as individual layers for very long. But here we now have a nice alternate arrangement of grain. And what I'm going to do is use a feature that's new to CS4. Now I'm going to select 2 layers at a time. You may have more luck selecting 3 or even all 4 layers at once. Personally, I had some errors when I tried 4 at once, so just to be safe, I'm going to do 2 at a time. I'll come up to the Edit menu and choose this great feature, Auto Blend Layers. Blend Method Panorama, and click OK. And after a moment thinking, you'll see, look, it's done this incredible job of blending the 2 stacked layers together into a new layer. Now let's repeat with the 3rd layer and now the 2nd layer. Edit, Auto Blend Layers, click OK. Again, pretty good. And the top layer and the next layer down, Edit, Auto Blend Layers, click OK. All right, now we've done a nice job of clearing up our seams. And if we select all of our layers and hit Command-E or Control-E on Windows, we can merge them all down into a single layer. That's a good start. But if we come back up here to our filter menu, once again choose Other and Offset. If we type in something like 400 pixels right, you'll see that we still have a very definite seam between the right edge and the left edge of our layers. So let's fix that. Click OK. Accept the offset so that we can very clearly see where the seam lives. And with our marquee tool, I'm going to just eyeball this and select one part of the texture and hold down Command-Shift-J or Control-Shift-J on Windows to float that selection via a cut and paste to a new layer. So now we have one layer that looks like this, and we have one layer that looks like this. All right? Now, with both layers on, I'm going to come back to my image menu and choose canvas size again. Switch to pixels again. Anchor ourselves to the left side again. And now change this to 800 pixels wide. So now we're going to be creating our final texture size, 400 pixels tall, 800 pixels wide. So it's a 2:1 aspect ratio, which is what we want. Click OK. It's going to warn us about cropping. That's no big deal because we're not going to lose any of that data. Click Proceed, and now with our topmost layer, come back over here and get our Move tool, and drag this over until it snaps. Doink. It's snapped. Now select both of these layers, and once again, come up to the Edit menu, choose Auto Blend Layers, Panorama, OK. And whammo, we've created a nice, seamless texture here. And because of the work we did earlier, if we come back up to the filter menu, nothing will be available to us because we actually have 2 layers selected over here that we still have to merge down. Let's merge them down, Command-E, Control-E on Windows. Now come up to the filter menu, choose Offset again. Should still be set to about 400 from the last offset. And you'll see it is nicely offset, that the texture is pretty much seamless. You can still see a little bit in there, but that's no big deal at all. You can see patches where textures meet other textures, but that's okay. What we're trying to avoid is a hard line, and we've done that nicely. Now I'm going to do one more step to kind of pump up the amount of detail and saturation in this image, and that is I'm going to come back over to our layer menu and duplicate this layer. Then to the topmost layer, once again I'll invoke the transform controls and rotate 180 degrees, hit enter, come over to our blend modes and choose overlay. And this is going to create this nice, richer, golder, more saturated texture. But it's also obviously repeating at this point. You can see the dark splotch here, the dark splotch here, the white splotch here, the white splotch there. And while that won't really matter much for the sake of our cup, it does create a sort of a symmetry that can be a bit of a giveaway for certain situations. So I'm going to come back up here to the filter menu, hold down the Option key or Alt on Windows, and select Offset once again. And instead of just reapplying the offset filter, that allows us to apply it again with controls. And let's set a value somewhere around 150 pixels or so. Anywhere from 125 to 175 will probably be fine. And click OK. And now we've busted up the symmetry. We've given ourselves a nice golden tone to our scratchy, beat-up texture. Once again, going to merge this down. Command-E, Control-E on Windows. And let's save this as a new texture. So I'm going to come up to File and choose Save As. And inside our Chapter 3 Textures and Lighting folder, I'm going to create a new folder and call it My Textures. Create Tarnished Metal, Seamless, and click Save. Okay? Now we can close this image, come back into Bridge. Let's open up our chalice with skull and take a closer look at this mysterious 3D panel.